I think what we're going to do today, we're going to continue and finish off the Aruch HaShulchan, since we invested so much into it already. I hope that the shir from last week was relatively clear. So what I was going to, we had touched on this, as I said earlier, and I didn't go into it. The sugya at the beginning on Chatzi Shir, actually, when you delve into it, it's a sugya that appears in Masachet Shavuot, and it's one of the sources in the Gemara for this concept of Isur Mosif. So what we learned last time is that we have the idea of Isur Mosif and Isur Kolel. And just to make a quick summary, so we say the general rule is Isur Chal al Isur, which, as I was listening back to the recording of the shiur, I thought the best way to translate that actually is that one Isur cannot take effect on top of another Isur. So if there's an Isur in place, you can't have another Isur on top of it. The example that we saw from the Bartanura was if you eat Nivlat Behemat Meya, if you eat the Nevela of an animal that's not kosher to begin with. So there's only one Isur, which is allowed to eat a Behemat Meya. And the fact that it's a Nevela, which is an Isur for a Behemat Tahora, is irrelevant regarding a Behemat Tmeya. Because, as we said, even if you shachted Behemat Tmeya in a kosher shlita, it doesn't change its status as a Behemat Tmeya. It's always a Behemat Tmeya. So you can't add on to that. So the Isur of Nevela is not chal on the Isur of Behemat Tmeya. So that's the general rule. Ein Isur chal al Isur. But when we talk about, I'm not going to reiterate the whole mission there, but the reason it's relevant here is we talk about Yom Kippurim is an Isur Kolel. So what that means is that the Torah tells us we're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippurim, and because it's understood in the broadest way, or certainly a very broad way. And what it means is, so it will come to be kolel. It includes anything that is edible. So once it includes anything that's edible, it will also include things that are asur eat, even when it's not Yom Kippur. So even when it's not Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to eat chelev or nevela or dam or notar or any of those things. But if you eat them on Yom Kippurim, they, in addition to the isur of eating them any other day of the year, they're now nichlalu b'toch kolel of Yom Kippurim. So, because Yom Kippurim covers all manner of edible food. So if you eat something that's not kosher on Yom Kippurim, let's say, if you eat chelev on Yom Kippurim, and specifically b'shogeg, you'll be chayav 2 chataot. You'll be chayav a chatat for Yom Kippurim, and you're chayav a separate chatat for having eaten chelev at all. And then so we had the idea of the Isur Mosif, where you can add on to an existing Isur. And the example there was, I believe, notar. Notar is an Isur that itself gets added onto the kachim, right? So if you have a korban, you have kachim, you have to eat it within a certain period of time. But even within that period of time, you're not allowed to eat the chaylev. The chaylev is always a sur for you to eat. So if you eat chaylev within the period of time that you're allowed to eat the korban as a whole, you'll be chayiv one chatat for having eaten chaylev. But if now the korban goes over time and the korban is notar, so that the notar is now nosaf. It's been nosaf. It's been added on to the isur that already existed on the chaylev. So that's the idea of isur mosif. So, quick summary. Those are tips that we may revisit, but for now, we're going to continue. Oh, the other thing I want to bring up. So somebody brought up to me an interesting question. We talked about this idea that on the one hand, the Torah, as Chazal understand it, the Torah forbids eating on Yom Kippurim, and the shiur for eating is based on the shiur that Chazal understood was miyat v'nafsha, or was miyashev nefesh. And we don't know exactly what that means, but that the idea seems to be, I think one way of understanding Yeshuv nefesh in this regard is when you're hungry, you I don't want to say necessarily you get anxiety, but you're uncomfortable in some basic way. And if you eat, then that discomfort will go away. So the way I understand Yeshuv HaNefesh in this regard is that that's what it means, that when you eat, then you have Yeshuv HaNefesh. Now, this would be a much longer shiur and something that I still think about, but the idea of nefesh, the term nefesh, seems to be directly linked to the physical body. Like we said just in right in Achrei Mot, ki hadam hu banefesh, that there's this idea that the mitzvah of not eating dam and kisui hadam is that we relate dam to the nefesh, to the physical body, and you're not allowed to eat that. So Yeshuv HaNefesh is putting your physical body at ease. That's the way I would summarize it. So we have, by contrast, we talked about the idea that you're allowed to smell something good on Yom Kippurim. And there, because presumably the reason you're allowed to smell something that's good is because that doesn't nourish your body. Right? So the Gemara says, second. I think it's here. Yeah, here. Gemara says, Amara of Zutra Bartuvia Rav Minayin Shemivarchin. Oh, wait. You can see that, right? It's the Gemara and Brachot of Mem Gimel Amud Bet. Amara of Zutra Bartuvia Amara Minayin Shemivarchin al Hareach. So where's the source in the Torah, or where's the source in the Pasuk to tell me that we should make a blessing on a smell, on an aroma. Shnemar kol hanshama tahalel. So, right, so the neshama is every aspect of the neshama will praise you. So the praise here is going to be the bracha. But why is it that the neshama is praising? How is this related to reach? So he says, "Ezehu davar shanshama nehenet mimenu, ve'ein haguf nehenet mimenu." So what is the thing for which the neshama gets benefit, but the body does not get benefit? Havi omer zehareach. So you'd say that would be aroma. That would be a good smelling thing. So, okay. So now, scientifically speaking, of course, we know that when you smell something, there are actual little particles that are going into your olfactory system, and that's how you smell them. But it's also even though that is true, but your body is not nourished by smelling, and yet we enjoy smelling things that smell good. It does something for us. And so that's the idea. The way Chazal understood it is the smell benefits your neshama. So the neshama is, by contrast to the nefesh, is related directly to the divine soul. And why do I say that? Because when God creates Adam, it says Vayipach bi'apav ruach nishmat chayim. That's the first place we have of neshama. So the idea of neshama is that it's the divine breath that God put inside of us. So we also see about the korbanot themselves, the korbanot in general. We have many psukim that say reach nichoach lashem. So what does that mean? It's a pleasing aroma to God. It fits in with the same concept, right? God is non-corporeal. So there's nothing that we can give to God that would benefit God's body, because God doesn't have a body. But when we burn the korbanot on the mizbeach, the smell, as it were, is something that relates to the neshama, it relates to the divine. So that's how it relates to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, who is divine and the source of all divinity.
So I'm curious about this phrase kol haneshama, which I actually haven't. I mean, I say it every day, but I haven't actually thought about it. But how can we say kol haneshama when presumably the soul is indivisible?
I'm not sure what your question is.
Or wouldn't kol haneshama be redundant if the soul, in fact, is indivisible?
Well, another way of understanding it is kol haneshama really means all souls.
Or every soul.
Every soul. Or all, right, every soul. Okay, and I see what you're saying. I did get this before, but since you bring that up, maybe we'll take a quick glance at the see if John says anything about this. Haviomer Zahareach. So this is the Maharsha on that Gemara that we just looked at. He says, Hareach hu echad mechamisha. I think I did see this. Hareach hu echad mechamisha hachushim hamurgashim. Right, so smell is one of the 5 detectable senses. The V'hem nimtzim b'chol ba'al chai. These senses are in all animals. Gam she'en lahem neshama. Even ones that don't have a neshama, right? So going on the assumption that animals don't have a neshama, but they still have a sense of smell. So what does it mean? So what does it mean? Kol Anshama, every all souls will praise you. Ukarov yoter leruchani mikol shar ha'arba chushim. The sense of smell is closer to the spiritual from more than the other senses. Hainu neshama de ka'amar, and that's the neshama that the pasuk mentions. The chush hareach ba'al yudei neshimata ruach shemichutz laguf l'toch haguf. The sense of smell is by inhaling the ruach, right? In this sense, it just means air that is outside of the body and inhaling it into the body.
So literally inspiration.
So that it will what?
Literally inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, yes, exactly. Hopefully not perspiration, but inspiration. That's the place where the neshama, the soul, benefits from it. The lo haguf, but not the body. So it could be that the animal, which doesn't have a neshama, but does have the spirit of life in it, maybe it doesn't benefit from it or doesn't enjoy it because it doesn't have neshama. All right, that's an interesting piece of speculation. Do animals enjoy good smells? I don't know. I would suspect they do. I see Paul is shaking his head. Do you have pets?
No, you have, when you walk with the dog, you see he's every tree is just looking for it.
Yes,
it enjoys it.
He also smells. I mean, I see Michael Schwartz is smiling because he has a dog. I mean, in my experience, dogs will smell like they're trying to smell.
He's sniffing around everywhere.
Michael Schwartz, do you have anything to add from your experience?
Not only does our dog stop at every tree, it stops for a long time. It's not like just a sniff and goes away. It's at places it can really be a long time. And when I try to pull her away, she does not want to go. She's obviously getting some pleasure out of it. Which is quite annoying to me. So depending where it is, I want to move on. Anyway.
I guess the Marsha didn't have a dog.
Probably not. So I'll show you something that, 1 second. Oh, I'll show you something that where the Aruch HaShulchan talks about this idea is in Hilchot Brachot, and let's look at the beginning of what he says. So here he says, so actually just to give you where he's coming from in terms of the Shulchan Aruch itself. I thought I could go there directly. 1 second. I apologize. I could have had this out. I wasn't sure if I was going to go into it, but I think it's worth talking about. It's a very interesting concept. So in the Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Resh Tet Zayin. So this is the part of the Shulchan Aruch that talks about Birkot HaNehanim, right? So it spends time talking about different foodstuffs and what brachot you make on them, and then eventually comes to smells. And it says, Asur le'anot me'reach tov ad sheyivarech kodem shi'ariach, right? So you're not allowed to benefit from a good smell until you make a blessing before you smell it. But afterwards, there is no bracha. So there's no bracha achrona for smelling. And also you can imagine now, you don't have the same considerations as you do with food because there isn't a shiur. We're not talking, there aren't shiurim that are relevant here. Whether you smell a little bit, whether you smell something a long time, once you say the bracha, then you're allowed to smell that thing. And then he talks about the different brachot that you say depending on what it is that you're smelling. So the Aruch HaShulchan here gives us a very nice introduction to the siman. He says, "Ita b'brachot." So there is in brachot in the Gemara, brachot minayin shemevarchin al hareach. So this is the Gemara that we just looked at. Where do we learn that we make a blessing over aroma? Shenamar kol hanshama tahallel. Ezu davar shenshama nenet mimenu ve'ein haguf nene mimenu. Aviomer ze hareach. So then you would say that's the smell. Klomar, shalom omar. So now he's going to give you his pshat in the Gemara. He's saying the point of the Gemara is like this: Shalom omar de'inot sarich bracha. We wouldn't say, so we shouldn't say that you don't need a blessing except ela davar anichnas setoch haguf. Maybe because this might be what you think, right? That the only thing you need to make a blessing on is things that you consume, like food or drink. Shahana murgeshet. Then because you feel the benefit, you feel the enjoyment. It was shayach lomar shasur le'anot me'olam hazeh belo bracha. So the Gemara says elsewhere, you're not allowed to benefit from this world without saying a blessing. So maybe you'll think, okay, but if I'm just smelling something, that's not really hana'ah. The lo bereich ba'alma, right? So, but maybe it's not talking about a stam smell, sheno nichnas leguf kol, that doesn't really go into the body. L'zeh darish mikra, the gam al hareach hatov yesh chiyuv bracha. So, on this, we have the drasha of the pasuk of Kol Shama, that even for a good smell, you also have an obligation to make a bracha. The kar'a hana'at haneshama, and they call it the benefit of the soul. Mishum de legabe achila u'shtiyah hu ta'anug ruchani hamyuchas l'neshama v'lo leguf. In contrast to eating and drinking, this would be considered a spiritual enjoyment that is connected to the neshama and not to the body. V'lachein k'vyachol gam al HaKadosh Baruch Hu k'tiv reach nichoach l'Hashem l'chein nikra reach b'nei shehu inyan ruchani. So he makes this interesting etymological connection that Reach and Ruach, that Reach is something that is spiritual. So,
Shel,
yes.
what he says here about smelling is also true about pictures, about the sight. And you do have brachot about very special sights. And also people you see which are famous and so on. And so
right.
Here also the body doesn't, nothing gets into the body. Well, the picture gets into the body, but not, there is no matter which goes into the body.
Okay, so the difference is, though, that Chazal classified those brachot as birkat re'iyah and birkat shmiyah, not birkot nehanin. They're not really for hana'ah, either of guf or neshama. You say those brachot because you're acknowledging the greatness of Hashem by saying them. So it doesn't figure immediately into this discussion. Whether you might say that you personally benefit or you felt a spiritual uplifting, that might be true, but it's not seen to affect your neshama in the same way as inhaling a good smell. And what you're doing, like I say, when you see a gorgeous scene or something exceptional, or you say Osema Aseh Bereshit, right? You say the bracha that I agree, right? Because the truth is, we could be making blessings every moment of the day, right? Because the mere fact that we can see things is also a blessing. But here we're talking about hana'ah. So now
that I think about it, that there is no, I don't think there's no, is there a bracha about hearing? The thunder, but
yes,
that's something
right.
special. But nothing. I don't remember. No, that if you hear a nice piece of music, you can have a huge hana'ah, which is also spiritual.
So I would not disagree with you. I would not disagree with you, but I think I think this deserves more examination that I'm going to do now, because I haven't thought of this in a deeper way based on what you bring up. For whatever reason, Chazal differentiate between these things which they call hana'ah or hana'at aguf or hana'at neshama. They differentiate between that and these other things that we're bringing up. So yes, you could certainly argue that music is something that benefits your soul, but for whatever reason, Chazal didn't categorize it that way. I don't know. I have to think about that. I think it's a good point. I think with music especially, and we know from the Torah and from Tanakh, right?
The Levim were singing the
right. It's the mitzvah. It's one of the mitzvot of the Levim. They have to sing when the korbanot are being brought. We also know the healing aspects of music from David, right? David would play on his kinor, and he would calm Shaul and so forth. And yet Chazal don't categorize that the enjoyment of that music within Birkot Nehanim. So it's an interesting thing. And
I would wonder if the difference between eating and smelling on the one hand and sight and hearing on the other is that with sight and hearing there's a continuum between sort of sound and language. And so well, never mind. I'm not actually. I should be basing this on text, and I can't. So I'm going to stop here.
Well, you know what, Michael? And I told you this many times, but I kind of see the direction you're going in. I would urge you.
I'm glad that one of us does.
Well, I would urge you to take time when hopefully you review the class to think about that and see if you can articulate what you're trying to say. But in any event, what you're introducing is another level of complexity, which I think which also bears examination. But here to go back to where we were. So the question is, on the one hand, I'm not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. And if I eat a shiur, tevet hagasa, that will be miyashev nefesh. And the Torah says, "V'yinitem et nafshotechem." Your nefesh is supposed to be mu'uneh. But Chazal understood that that's the nefesh that has to be inui. But the neshama, you're allowed to give benefit to your neshama on Yom Kippur. And one of the ways you can do that is by smelling something good. So what's the difference? Why should I be allowed to give benefit to my neshama and not to my nefesh?
That depends on how you I don't know how they define nefesh and neshama.
Well,
I think these are words which very much changed during history, their meaning.
Well, so that's why I introduced this part of the shiur by saying nefesh seems to be connected to the physical body. Let's say the life force of the physical body, right? And then the neshama
I think
would be
Aviva Zornberg,
the eternal soul, like the eternal soul, that the divine soul that's within us. Michael Werner, what do you want to say?
if I recall, in a discussion of Acharei Mot Kedushim, Aviva Zornberg, I believe, talks about the nefesh as embodied soul.
So there's good reason to say that. I don't.
I mean,
yeah.
something and then connected to the body, but not coterminous, maybe.
Yeah. So here's by the way, here's the hitch with my here's the rub, as Shakespeare might have said, with saying that the nefesh is primarily corporeal. It's connected to the physical body because we get the idea that on Shabbat we get a second nefesh. We learn it from the pasuk Shabbat vayin nafash, and the drasha is vayin nafash, that when you're shovet, you get an extra nefesh. Based on what I'm saying so far, you would think that you get an extra neshama. So, but we don't. We say we get an extra nefesh, and then the way we leave the parting of the extra nefesh on, let's say, Shabbat, is to smell something good, which appeals to our neshama. So nefesh is not purely the body, but that's why I say, like I use the term life force. It has a corporeal aspect. I think the corporeal aspect of the nefesh is that it's necessary to have a body to have a nefesh. But I don't think it's necessary to have a body to have a neshama, that the neshama will outlast the body. Now, I'm going way out on a limb here because these are things that I think about and I see here and there, but I haven't put them all together. But what you're saying, Michael Werner, and it would be interesting to see what Aviva Zornberg has to say about it. There's still a divine aspect to the nefesh. It's not a pure corporeal thing. Nonetheless, to bring it back, we have this idea that you're not allowed to have Yishuv HaNefesh on Yom HaKippurim because of at least whatever the corporeal aspect of the nefesh is, the life force within you. We want that to be me'uneh. We want that to be afflicted. But your neshama, I would argue, that's not really a point of affliction. Lehefech, I think one of the reasons that the Torah gives us the idea of inui nefesh, it could be that that's a way of raising the neshama. So there's a certain kind of spiritual height that one may be able to get only on Yom Kippur. And there's a certain aspect of the raising of neshama that's connected to Yom Kippur, and maybe that is a kind of hana'at haneshama, in the same way, or I shouldn't say the same way, but let's say in some parallel way to the reach nichoach laHashem, that somehow the aroma of the korbanot is somehow something which kivyachol Kadosh Baruch Hu is neheneh mimenu. So we also can raise, we raise our neshamot dafka by going through the avodah of Yom Kippurim that we do, which is mainly to fast and to pray. So I think it fits in. This is my own idea, but it seems to me this fits into the idea that you're allowed to smell something good on Yom Kippurim to give benefit to your neshama. That's not the same as Yishuv HaNefesh or Hityashvut HaNefesh. Hityashvut HaNefesh, you're still going to be hungry. You'll still be hungry, even if you smell something really good. It might even make you more hungry. But there's something deep inside you that will benefit from it. And maybe that in turn is also going to help you in your spiritual quest on Yom Kippurim. That's my theory. You can do with it what you want. So with that, let's go back. We just have, I think, 4 seifim to finish, 4 or 5. Let's see. So, shiur shtiya b'yom kippurim gam ken eno kib'chol ha'isurim me'atam shenitba'er. So the shiur for drinking on Yom Kippur is also not like all other isurim, for the reason that is explained. Mishum de Yom Kippurim havi shiur kedei yishuv hanefesh. The shiur on Yom Kippur that's relevant is enough to be miyashev the nefesh, as we've been talking about. Ach havi hefech me'achila, but the shiur for drinking is I'm adding in some words, is measured in the opposite way of eating. T'vachila havi shiur sheyom kippurim yoter mishiur kol ha'isurim. The amount that you eat to be over on Yom Kippurim is greater than the amount that you would need to eat to be over on any other isur. T'chol ha'isurim bekazayit. Uv'yom Kippurim kechol tevet, right? All other isurim, once you eat a kazayit, you're over, and on Yom Kippur you have to eat more than a kazayit. You have to eat a kekotevet to be over. V'shtiyah havi lahefech, and shtiyah is the opposite. The b'chol isurim havi shiur shtiyah berevi'it. V'yom Kippurim havi shiura kimlo lugmav. The ba'adam kimlo lugmav. The shiur for drinking on Yom Kippur is a cheekful, as opposed to the shiur for drinking for any other isurim is a revi'it. And the ba'adam benoni hu pachot merevi'it. An average-sized person, a cheekful is less than a revi'it. It's a revi'it of a log. Umalo lugmav shamarno be'oro. The explanation of malo lugmav is kol she'ilu misal kol tzad echad mipiv yitra'eh Kilmelod lugmav. The amount of liquid that you push into one side of your mouth so that it bulges out, that's the amount that we consider to be melod lugmav. We measure each person according to their cheekful. And this is not similar then to eating. With people in general, there's one shiur, which is kakotevet hagasa, and not so of drinking. This is all halacha l'Moshe Sinai. The kol echad b'mlo lugmav shelo mityashevet da'ato. Part of the idea is that this was a Kabbalah, Moshe Sinai, that Yeshuva Nefesh in drinking really depends on how much you can fit into your cheekful, and not on an objective outside measure. All manner of drinks combine to fill out the shiur of Melo Lugmav. Nonetheless, the hashayot yesh machloket. In terms of how long the hashayot here means, like how long it takes to drink. Within what period of time do you need to drink a Melo Lugmav in order to be over? Yesh machloket. Rashi v'Tosfot havi shiur b'chtei achilat pras, kumo b'achila. According to Rashi and Tosfos, the amount of time that you would have to drink a Melo Lugmav within is kedei achilat pras, the same as for eating, right? The amount of time that you have to eat a shiur in order to be over is kedei achilat pras. It's also the amount of time you would have to drink Melo Lugmav in order to be over. And that's really what it says in Kritot. Amnam, a Rambam, Perik Sheni Din Dalid Katav, Shatamaat, Perik Dalid, Perik Bet Din Dalid, he means Perik Bet in Bilchot Yom Kippurim, right? That, or Shvitat Asor, I think is what the Rambam calls it, Shvitat Asor. So there he writes, if you drank a little and then you went back and drank a little more, im yesh mitchilat shtiya rishona ad sof shtiya achrona kedei shtiyat revi'it mitztarfin l'shiur. V'im lav ein mitztarfin ad kan l'shona. The Rambam says that the shiur of the hashaya, the shiur that you have to drink within, is the amount of time that it would take a normal person to drink a revi'it. So the Rambam makes this hashaya, it's parallel to eating, right? So with eating, the shiur of the hashaya is based on how quickly I eat a pras. And he says for drinking, I'm going to measure using a drink measure. How quickly or how long does it take for me to drink a revi'it? And this is how the Rambam holds by all the Yisurim, not just drinking on Yom Kippur. And he brings from Perik Yudal Hilchot Halacha Yutet Mimachalot Asurot. And Rambam elsewhere in Hilchot Machalot Asurot also brings us shiur of Kedei Shtiyat Revi'it. Uchvart Tamahu Alachmei Hadorot. The wise men of the generations have already wondered about him about this. V'nachnu be'er dvorav b'Yoredei Siman Pehei Ayin Sham v'ha'ikar l'dina k'dea rishona shekeinu da'at rov ha'poskim. So the Aruch HaShulchan says that he says we explain his words in Yoredei Siman Pehei. He doesn't. I looked at the Aruch HaShulchan there. I've gone through that now a couple of times. We referenced it earlier in one of the other shiurim. The Aruch HaShulchan there has a very long discussion about different aspects of shiurim and various isurim, and he does bring up this problem. So the problem is that the Rambam. The problem is that the Rambam introduces this shiur of Kadesh Tiyat Revi'it. Nobody knows what his source for that is. It's very problematic. And what the Aruch HaShulchan discusses in Siman Pehei, he goes through different terutzim that various Rishonim and Achron gave to try to understand the Rambam, but he more or less pushes them away. Like he doesn't really like any of them. He doesn't really. I have to go through it again, but I don't think he offers an alternative. Anyway, we'll have to leave it as a siman she'ela. But lahalacha, it's not important in the sense that lahalacha, we still use kedei achilat pras also for drinking. And again, that's going to be relevant for anybody who has to eat or drink on Yom Kippur. They need to know how much time they have to wait between drinking a chatzi shiur and the next chatzi shiur. Seif Yud. וגם במשכין, אם שתה משכין שאינם ראויים לשתייה, פטור מכרת. So also regarding drinks, if you drink drinks that are not fit for drinking, then you're exempt from karet. ולכן, אם שתה ציר, או שומן של דגים, או חומץ חי שהוא חזק כל כך, עד שיבעבע כשיפול על הארץ, פטור מכרת. So if you drink brine or fish oil or fish fat, or uncut, right, undiluted vinegar that is so powerful that when it falls on the ground, it bubbles. If you drink any of those things, you're patur from karet. Makinoto makat mardut, but he is chayav makat mardut because it's still asur midrabanan to drink even things that aren't fit for drinking, but not midoraita. Aval im shata chometz mazug b'mayim kimlo lugmav chayav. If you drink vinegar that's been diluted with water enough to fill your cheek full, then you are chayav. And I think we discussed this already before. There are people who do that on a regular basis anyway, people who drink vinegar, diluted vinegar every day as a kind of a prophylactic for their health. So he introduces an idea that we didn't see in the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Berurah. He says, if you drink oil on Yom Kippur, you're also patur from karet. Da'azuki mazikle, because it's harmful to him. It's harmful to a person. Kedita beresh perek ketzad mevarchin ayen sham. The Gemara indicates that drinking straight oil is not good for your body. And so he says, since it's azuki mazik, then you're patur. It's considered to be not ra'ui. Finally, Seif Yudav, Kol HaShiurim ha'elu, Hem l'chiyuv karet. Aval l'inyan isur afilu b'shtiya kol duhu asur min haTorah, kemo b'achila. The chatzi shiur asur min haTorah. So all of these shiurim, I'm only telling them to you regarding the chiyuv karet, but of course regarding isur, you're not allowed to drink anything, even the smallest amount, mina Torah, because chatzi shiur is asur mina Torah, as we learned from the Gemara. About barok shebefiv, right, the spit that's in your mouth, the saliva that's in your mouth, lo shayach b'liya. It's not pertinent to talk about swallowing that, as if that would be drinking, to swallow your own saliva. Then bezemamash, because there isn't anything really there. In other words, it's a small thing. But he says, Dim Lav came, if you wouldn't say that, Harei alav larok kol hayom b'li hafsek. It means a person would have to be spitting all day to make sure they never swallow any of their saliva. The Katav Rabbeinu Harama, Dumutar liga b'yom kippurim ba'ochlinu mashkin. So this is, we saw this in the Shulchan Aruch, that you're allowed to handle, you're allowed to touch and handle food on Yom Kippur, ba'ochlinu mashkin, v'litein laktanim, you're allowed to give it to children. You're allowed, we're not worried that you're going to eat or drink just because you're handling food. So then you'll say, but why? So why is it allowed on Yom Kippur? But you're not really supposed to handle chametz on Pesach. It says v'lodami lechametz b'Pesach, demat Yom Kippurim alav. So it's not the same as not handling chametz on Pesach, because on Yom Kippur, the fear and the awe of the day is upon you. So you're going to be extra careful not to eat, which I think I can say, assuming other people can say based on their experience, once Yom Kippur comes in, because you did all this preparation, you had a Sudam Afseket, your whole mindset changes. And so even if you see food in front of you, you're not going to all of a sudden so easily forget that today is Yom Kippur. The other difference is that on Pesach, you're not separated from eating and drinking. You're still allowed to eat and drink all through Pesach. So there we're worried that maybe you'll eat or drink chametz. Right? So this is also not like Yom Kippur, where one is completely separated. In other words, you're completely separated from eating. There is no heter to eat on Yom Kippur, even a kol shul. En chashash bezen. So then there's no fear of this. Mashma b'Yoma ayin shan. From the Gemara in Yoma, there is a mashma'ut. It doesn't say it explicitly, but you could infer it from the Gemara there. Okay, that's the end of this siman. I think what we'll do, we want to go back now to look at the Gemara. 1 second. And I'm going to apologize because I'm not going to do very much. I'm going to end the class early because I still have things I need to get done. So I apologize. I know we usually go later, but it's okay. We're going to use this time just to introduce now the next part of the Gemara. One moment. Hold on a second. Okay. Okay. We'll really go through this next time, but we're going to be picking up from here because in the meantime, I told you we're skipping over this Agarata about Daniel, about Yechezkel and Daniel and all of that, and I do want to come back to it, but I'll just remind you. The Gemara says. The Gemara earlier, it wants to know where we learn the other inuyim from, right? So achila and shtia those are the inuyim that we learn directly from the initem, right? But what about the other inuyim? So the Gemara goes through them. So the Gemara, we did the Gemara already. It says talks about where we learn sicha, you're not allowed to anoint yourself. So the Gemara, we already saw this, but we'll just say ashkechan sicha. We learned out sicha v'chitza minara. Where do I learn out that you're not allowed to wash on Yom Kippur? And then we bring this drasha of Amarav Zutra b'Rabbi Tuvia Amarkra v'tavo kamayim b'kirbo cheshemen ba'atzmotav. So the idea being that the same way that water comes, drink water and it comes inside of you, so this is also the same way that I learned from Sicha, Keshemen Batzmotav, the same way that Shemen goes into you and gets absorbed even into your bones. So this is also then true for water, that water that you wash yourself with will also come into you. And so, in other words, there's a hekesh between water and shemen. So I'm going to learn out, according to this, learning out rechitza from sicha, because they're connected in this pasuk. Why didn't I say that actually that sicha is like shtia? In other words, I can learn the pasuk the other way around. Say that I can learn out that sicha is asur because it's like water that I drink. So he said. So the Gemara answer is dumya de shemen. The water in this pasuk is like the shemen in this pasuk. Ma shemen me avrai, af mai me avrai. Just the same way that oil is applied from the outside. So the pasuk must be talking about water that is also on the outside of the body.
So there's no connection made here to this sense of touch, which has seemed to be sort of the one sense that's been absent from our discussion.
Well, what do you mean? I'm not sure what you're getting at.
Well, it's like in water. I mean, like when one's bathing and when one's anointing oneself, I mean, it is a pleasing, or it can be pleasurable for one's sense of touch.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah. So those are both right. They're both dependent on a sense of touch, but these things apparently these things in particular are the things that we find pleasurable, anointing ourselves and washing ourselves, as opposed to, I don't know, touching chocolate pudding or something like that, or touching tar, or touching, there's substances that we touch that are not so pleasing. And see, the other thing I just want to say before I drift off too much on this, here's the thing. When you read Tanakh, we understand these are the way people took care of their bodies in ancient times. When you came in from the road, you would wash your arms and your legs. And we know that if you were upper class, or you were royalty, or some a wealthier person, you would also anoint yourself with oil. These are things that were done, the hana'ata guf. So I think it makes sense that this is how it comes down, and this is how Chazal understood it, that these are the things that we do for our bodily pleasure, and therefore they are asur, therefore they are inuyim. And now what we're doing in the Gemara is looking for biblical sources to back it up. So you'll notice, though, that the biblical source here is from him. In other words, I'm not looking at this in the same way as like when I make a drasha from the Torah. It was important for us to make a connection between inui and achila and shtiya, because the Torah says unitem. And here, I'm using the psukim to as a kind of asmachta. just to relate, to give me something to relate on and rely on as a source. But I think the real source of it is, right, there's some kind of halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and it's related to the way people are on a day-to-day basis. What are the other inuyim? Rechitza, sicha, milata sandal, and tashmisha mita. So these are all sort of daily things that we experience, that we remove ourselves on this day. I think there's more to be said about it, and you're bringing up the sense of touch. I think is interesting, also worth considering. But I think basically these categories were like obvious categories. I may be wrong about that, but that just seems to me, just like from reading Tanakh, and the other ones that we'll get to. Well, we talked about Tashmish Mita, but we'll get to now to Rechitza and also to Milat Sandal. V'hatana ifcha kana sivla dinan minay masicha shikashtiya b'yom kippurim. Right. I hope you all remember this. We did it a few weeks ago. So the Gemara challenges this idea that that you would learn shtiya from sicha, because I see in the Mishnah that the Mishnah asks, where do we learn that anointing oneself is like drinking on Yom Kippur? In other words, the nature of the question is that we're going to start with shtiya, and I'll learn out sicha from shtiya. And a moment ago, you just said, that tells me, that's supposed to tell me that I learn out that you're not allowed to, that washing and anointing yourself, I learn washing from anointing yourself. And the Mishnah here, I feel like I'm not explaining this clearly, so let me just start again. The Mishnah says, where do I learn that anointing oneself is like drinking on Yom Kippur? The Mishnah says, I learn out from this pasuk that you, Rav Zutra, you just brought a moment ago, to tell me that I learn rechitza from sicha using this pasuk. But I see the Mishnah says, no, I learn sicha from shtiya using this pasuk. So it contradicts the source that Rav Zutra bar Tuvia brings. He's using the same source, and he's saying, I learn from this source that rechitza is asur, because I see that the pasuk says it's like anointment, that rechitza is like anointment, and tavo kamayim b'kirbo is really talking about rechitza. But here I see in the Mishnah that no, the Mishnah understands it, that I learned from tavo kamayim b'kirbo, which is shtiya. I learned that kashemen batzmontav is like shtiya, that anointing oneself is like shtiya. So the Gemara pushes away this raya, it pushes away this proof, and it says, Elamar Ravashi, rechitza migufe dekrash miele, dichtiv v'soch lo sachti. I learned from the very body of the pasuk, and this is a pasuk that we quoted earlier. We're not going to do a full review. You can do it yourself. This was a pasuk in Daniel, that when Daniel underwent his own inuyim, right? He says, "Lechem chamudot lo achalti, ubasar v'yayin lo ba el pi, v'soch lo sachti." These are the things, right? Adon lo shoshet shavuim yamin. Like, for 3 whole weeks, I didn't eat fine bread, and I didn't eat meat or wine, and wine did not come into mouth. Besoch lo sachti, and anointed I did not anoint. So Rav Ashi says it's the repetition, it's the what the seeming redundancy of soch lo sachti. It would have been enough for him to say lo sachti. So soch lo sachti implies that he didn't put any, he didn't put any other things on his body, meaning he didn't wash. So that's where we left off before we started looking at the Shulchan Aruch and all of that. And next time we're going to go into, so for, like I say, for the moment, we're going to skip this whole fascinating drasha. And then we get up to here. So this is already on, this is still on Ayin Vav Amud Bet. So this is lower on Ayin Vav Amud Bet. The Gemara now comes back to this question of Rechitza. How do I know that you're not allowed to wash in Yom Kippur? So the Gemara says, V'i bayit ema. If you want, I'll say, Rechitza de'ikre inui minalan. Where do I know that Rechitza, that is not washing, is an inui? Mehacha, I learned from here. Dichtiv u'Aviatar kohen amar hamelech natot lech al sadecha כי איש מוות אתה, וביום הזה לא עמיתך, כי נשאת את ארון השם אלוקים לפני דוד אבי, וכי התנית בכל אשר התנה אבי. Now, for those of you who want to prepare for next week, you can look at the context of this pasuk. This is in Melachim Aleph Perek Bet. Read the first two prakim of Melachim Aleph, and you may know the story, and hopefully you've learned it before. It starts off with David, who's at the end of his days, and before he dies, there is already competition among his sons about who is going to be the next king, where Adoniah wants to already show that he's going to be the next king. But David had promised that Shlomo was going to be king. And of course, that's ultimately what happens. And in Perek Bet, before David dies, he has a kind of tzva'ah where he tells Shlomo things that he needs to be aware of and to take care of. And one of them is how to treat different people who crossed him, people who should be punished, or if not punished, but have to be kept in their place. So one of them is Evyatar. So you can read the first couple of prakim there. You'll see the context here. Evyatar, who was the Kohen, right? So Evyatar is a Kohen who sides with Adoniah and not with Shlomo. But Evyatar had a much earlier history with David, which is in Shmuel Bet. And that has to do with the story of the city of Nov and how Shaul came to slaughter, to massacre all the Kohanim in Nov. And the only one who escaped was Evyatar. And Evyatar then went out to be with David. And so what the Gemara is going to say, David, and it's written about him with David, and it's about Evyatar. Ki amru ha'am ra'eh va'ayef et sameh b'midbar. The people who were going with David at that time, they went under some dire conditions, and they were Ra'ev, Ayef, and Sameh. So Ra'ev, Milechem, they were hungry for bread. Sameh, Mimayim, they were thirsty for water. Ayef, Mimai. So what does the Ayef imply? What was the Ayef for? Lav mi rechitza, Doesn't it mean that they weren't able to wash? And the Gemara says, sandal. Maybe ayefi here means that they went without shoes. I'm actually going to learn. I'm going to learn it out from here. Maybe that's not also a good pasuk. So the Gemara answers. So we'll go through and explain this Gemara next time. And if you want to get the background, it's not vital, but I actually spent some time reviewing Shmuel and Melachim because I wanted to feel it in context. You can look here in Melachim, and the story in Shmuel, 1 second, starts earlier. It's back. The story with Nov starts in Shmuel Aleph, Perek Kaf Aleph. So if you start reading from there, you'll see the story. But you can start earlier. What you need to know is that story begins. David is running away from Shaul, who's trying to kill him, and that's where he goes to Nov, and you'll see he goes and he pretends that he's there as an agent of Shaul, and he doesn't tell the Kohanim there that he's actually running away from Shaul. And this ultimately leads to them all being slaughtered. And as I say, Ebiatar manages to escape, and the point is that Ebiatar goes along with David. He's with David through one of David's very most trying times in his life. So I think that's where we're going to stop for now, and hopefully next week I will be back in Washington, and I will continue from there, and I'll have a nicer background than what I have today.
Yes,
So that's it for now.
Actually, I think it's a very nice background, if I may say
Well,
so.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I gave up on trying to do the artificial backgrounds because when you move, they look funny.
No.
Unless you have
Are you going to
Yeah.
finish the Sefer Torah this time, or it's not? There's no way.
Listen, I was shooting to have it done by Rosh Hashanah. I think it will be very close. I have a feeling now that it's not going to be by Rosh Hashanah, but I think it might be by Sukkot. It'll be very close. I think I'm going to come back for a short visit for like a week in July for a couple of reasons, mainly because one of my daughters is due to give birth then. I'd like to be here for that. I may also have to move, which is another whole story. I'm hoping I don't, but if I do have to move, I'm going to try to put it off until July and just like pack everything up and put it into storage for the next few months. But yes, and anyway, hopefully somewhere around the Chagim, plus minus, I'm going to finish that Sefer Torah. My life will gain a little bit more normalcy.
As they say in Washington.
Yeah, well, touche. Okay, everybody, have a good evening. I'll see you
Bye-bye.
next.
Asiya Tova.
עשייה טובה. תודה.